lot of things that can be put to good use in the kitchen with a little bit of creativity, but hair is not one of them. Scalding and scraping a pig. It is an art. It requires great stubbornness and finesse. So another essential element is to keep the water moving and the pig moving, lest his carcass rest against the side of the barrel and not come in contact with water. And so you have to dance with your pig. Black skin or brown skin, whatever color the pig is, that epidermal or external layer will come off, revealing a white dermis. And that's the beginning of an overscald. Just almost overscald, but it's still good. That can get much worse. So that tells me we're just perfect. Right on the line. Good. Shake the booty. Yes, would you mind talking about the skin retention on hog butchery? One of my favorite topics. Particularly when you get to breaking down the cuts. Which cuts do you leave the skin on besides bacon? Excellent question. I'm gonna write what we just talked about here. Reefer madness. Not that kind of reefer. Refrigeration, care, and feeding. Boom. Okay. So leaving the skin on a pig, how does that change the way you would cut that pig when you go to butcher it? For me, it depends mostly on the quantity of fat, oddly enough. So the general rule is leave skin on the parts of the pig that you are going to cure or that will be cooked long enough to achieve the crisping of the skin. With the exception of like trotters and hocks, always have skin. Those will always, I hope, always have skin. We never take the skin off those. And those are examples where the skin is not necessarily crisped, necessarily. Frequently tis, and tis wonderful. But when you are thinking about that side of pork with all the skin on, like for me, always leave the skin on the shoulder. And then cut your Boston shoulders nice and thick so that when you roast it, you can roast it skin side up. You know, it can stand a little bit and the skin side is up. And your Boston shoulder is tough and fatty. So you're going to cook that thing for a long time. Long enough for the skin to crisp. Whereas if it's like a quick roast, maybe like a loin roast, and you know, you're just roasting that for less than an hour, the skin at the end of that might just be rubbery, not crispy. And of course that depends on temperature, but that's the general guideline is the parts that you know you're going to cook long enough to crisp the skin, leave the skin on. And what is long enough? So I'm thinking like with what the minimum to crisp skin is, and this depends on age too. The younger the pig, the easier the skin will crisp. If the pig is an intact boar, if he has testicles and testosterone, his skin will be a little thicker and it won't crisp as well, particularly as he gets older. But, you know, a normal hog, let's say 8 months old, 200 pounds, that skin should crisp pretty good, should crisp pretty readily. And if you were to take a shoulder roast off of that guy, well, let's do a leg roast because that's a better example of a quicker cooking cut. And you roasted it for an hour at 400 degrees, the skin would be crispy. If you really wanted it to tip it into extra crispitude with little bubbles on the skin, you might have to drip really hyper hot oil on it, like lard, or whack up the heat at the very end to 450 for about 20 minutes and then it'd get real crispy. But the minimum, you know, usually you'll start to get some nice crispy skin, 400, 415, you know, for an hour, I would say, somewhere around there. So that's about anything shorter than that you're going to cook shorter than that, you might not get the crisposity you desire. So there is a big exception to this is if the pig is real lean. So for me, you know, when I have a pork chop and it's from a lean pig, and I've just got this little, like ½ inch of back fat on the pork chop. If I take the skin off, I'm removing at least half the fat, and I don't want to do that. I want to leave that on there. So I will leave the skin on the pork chop. Even though it probably won't get all crisped. That skin won't get all crisp. I still prefer to have the fat on the chop. But even then, if it's a young enough pig and you did a good job scalding and scraping, if you cut the chops nice and thick, you start the chop up on end in the skillet. Start it on the skin, medium-low heat, and let it go for a while and just keep checking it. And you'll see soon it'll start to get blistered and crispy. When it's done that, then knock it over to fry on both sides. So, gosh, there's actually really nothing I take the skin off, to be honest. The only time I really do is when it's a really fatty pig, like a major lard pig, and it would be kind of a waste. So let's say you have a lard pig with 4 inches of back fat. This is very common with the lard pigs, like American guinea hog or a nice mature Gloucester old spot. And on at least one of the shoulders from the Boston, particularly the one closer to the rib, it's very likely that your first roast, let's say it's like 4 inches wide, it'll have 4 inches of back fat and then just a little bit of meat down there, just a little tiny bit. Now that is awesome, and it will be delicious if you roast that at 325 degrees for 2 hours and then whack it up to 450 for 40 minutes. It'll be awesome. But you will literally have like a quart of fat in the bottom of the roasting dish. And you might have been able to use that a little better. You can keep it, it's dripping, so I guess it's never lost. But for me, when I have ones that are that fat, I do like to peel the fat off, but I don't do so in a way that wastes the fat or the skin. I peel it off in a nice homogeneous square of really fatty skin, and I cure it for lardo. That's what I'm trying to say. So yeah, when you're deciding how much skin to leave on, the general guidelines I follow are, if it's going to cook long enough to crisp, leave the skin on. If the pig is really lean, even on cuts you're going to cook quickly, leave the skin on. When you're going to cure something, ham, anything you're going to smoke, leave the skin on. Bacon, ham, leave it on the hocks, leave it on the trotters. Obviously, it goes without saying, the trotters in the head, because that's one of the main reasons that you do scald and scrape, is to retain the skin there. That's like 90% of the food value of those items anyway, is in the skin. So like, where I might remove it? If I wanted a loin steak, loin cutlets, or sirloin steaks from a pig, particularly sirloin on a nice fat pig, right? It'd be a thin little steak with like that. If you were to leave the skin on, you'd also have to leave on like 2.5 inches of back fat, which is like 4 times the volume of the little sirloin steak. And then you got the skin. So I would take that off, especially since the sirloin skin is just a it's fast. Sirloin steaks cook quickly, too quick to crisp the skin. Those are my general guidelines. I hope that makes sense.